Madam Chair. Mr. Sloan, earlier today you said that Wells Fargo does not put profits over people, correct?
That's correct.
I'm interested in the human rights abuses and environmental disasters that some say are financed by your bank, Wells Fargo. In a recent Guardian article by Crystal Tubles and Matt Remley, they stated, Wells Fargo has pursued profits without principles by investing in private prisons, for-profit immigration detention centers, loan shark-like payday lending, and holding much of the bond debt, strangling Puerto Rico's efforts to lift itself out of its financial crisis. Is it true that Wells Fargo has invested or financed in some of these industries?
We made a decision 2 years ago to exit the two relationships that we had with two private prisons firms. One has been exited, and then when the credit agreement with the other one amortizes and matures, we will no longer have that relationship.
Are those two companies Geo Group and Core Civic?
Correct.
And which one has been exited, Geo Group or Core Civic?
I can't recall exactly which one. But,
okay.
Yep.
Madam Chair, I'd like to seek unanimous consent to submit 3 reports highlighting the bank's role in debt financing these groups, the for-profit prison companies running ICE detention facilities.
Without objection, such is the order.
Mr. Sloan, why was the bank involved in the caging of children and financing the caging of children to begin with?
I don't know how to answer that question because we weren't.
So in finance, you were financing and involved in debt financing of Core Civic and Geo Group, correct?
For a period of time, we were involved in financing one of the firms. We're not anymore, and the other. I'm not familiar with the specific assertion that you're making, but we weren't directly involved in that.
Okay, so these companies run private detention facilities run by ICE, which is involved in caging children. But I'll move on. Mr. Sloan, Wells Fargo was also an investor, and a major investor in the Dakota Access Pipeline and the Keystone XL pipelines. They were prime investors and lenders to companies building these pipelines in defiance of Standing Rock Sioux's treaty rights to protect its water and sacred lands. They warned early on, the Lakota Sioux warned early on that the pipeline was unstable and bound to leak. Despite that, it was built anyway, and it has leaked at least 5 times. And the Keystone XL in particular had one leak that leaked 210,000 gallons across South Dakota. Since Wells Fargo financed the building of this pipeline in an environmentally unstable way, why shouldn't the bank be held responsible for financing the cleanup of the disasters from these projects?
Which pipeline are you referring to?
Either.
So we were not involved in the financing of the XL pipeline. We were one of the 17 or 19 banks that was involved in the financing of the Dakota Access Pipeline.
Okay, so Wells Fargo hasn't financed any company associated with the Keystone XL pipeline?
No, I didn't say that. I said we're not involved in financing that pipeline specifically.
Okay, so let's focus on the Dakota Access Pipeline. Should Wells Fargo be held responsible for the damages incurred by climate change due to the financing of fossil fuels and these projects?
I don't know how you'd calculate that, Congresswoman.
Say from spills, or when we have to reinvest in infrastructure, building seawalls from the erosion of infrastructure, or cleanups, wildfires, etc.
Related to that pipeline, I'm not aware that there's been any of what you described that's occurred related
How
to that pipeline.
about the cleanups from the leaks of the Dakota Access Pipeline?
I'm not aware of the leaks associated with the Dakota Access Pipeline that you're describing.
So hypothetically, if there was a leak from the Dakota Access Pipeline, why shouldn't Wells Fargo pay for the cleanup of it, since it paid for the construction of the pipeline itself?
Because we don't operate the pipeline. We provide financing to the company that's operating the pipeline. Our responsibility is to ensure that at the time that we make that loan, that customer, and we have a group of people in Wells Fargo, including an environmental oversight group headed by one of my colleagues who used to be at the EPA.
So one question, why did Wells Fargo finance this pipeline when it was widely seen to be environmentally unstable?
Again, the reason that we were one of the 17 or 19 banks that financed that is because our team reviewed the environmental impact, and we concluded that it was a risk that we were willing to take.
Thank you. Terry Ross, thank you for coming in and offering your testimony today. Kansas Secretary of State Chris Kobach, mentioned by my colleague, was noted by the New York Times as laboring long and hard in his career, notably in the areas of voter suppression and nativism. He stated last year that he encouraged President Trump to add a question about citizenship to the census during the early weeks of Trump's presidency. Kobach said, quote, "I raised the issue with the president shortly after he was inaugurated, and, quote, he was absolutely interested in this." Shortly thereafter, in April of 2017, Steve Bannon asked you to speak to Mr. Kobach about his, quote, ideas about including a citizenship question on the 2020 decennial census. Did you speak to Mr. Kobach about his ideas on the citizenship question?
As I described earlier in my testimony, Chris Kobach did have a conversation with me early on in my... I'm sorry, I'm not finished. Chris Kobach did have a conversation with me. He said he had a question he would like us to ask.
Thank you. And I thought here, I'm sorry, I must reclaim my time. Mr. Kobach later sent an email to you on July 14th, writing that the lack of the citizenship question, quote, leads to the problem that aliens who do not actually reside in the United States are still counted for congressional apportionment services. Of course, they do reside in the United States. They reside in my district. They're my constituents. But he then wrote, quote, "It is essential that one simple question be added to the upcoming 2020 census. It's all there in black and white." Kobach is clear about his reason for adding the citizenship question in his correspondence to you. And it has nothing to do with the DOJ. It has nothing to do with the Voting Rights Act. It is about congressional apportionment to immigrants. But following that email and its concerning contents, did you cut off all contact with Mr. Kobach, or did you speak with him again?
I have no recollection of speaking with him again after that.
Well, we do have the Southern District of New York has identified a July 25th call between you and Mr. Kobach after that email. Did you bring up Mr. Kobach or his ideas about the citizenship question with anyone in the Commerce Department after Kobach's email?
I ultimately rejected the question that Kobach wanted asked.
So it does say here, Judge Furman in the Southern District of New York wrote that you, in fact, mentioned Kobach again in a September 6th meeting, in a September 6, 2017 meeting on the citizenship question. In fact, it was so concerning to your own staff that the General Counsel expressed, quote, concern about your contact with Kobach and recommended talking to others first. Do you recall anything about that meeting?
No, I don't. If you have a document, if you have a document, I'll be glad to look at it.
I'd be happy to share that. And additionally, do you think it would be helpful for us to speak with Mr. Kobach about this matter?
I have no idea. The committee has to make its own decisions.
All right. One other thing, it's been stated multiple times in this hearing that the question is a reinstatement of a previous question. But the last time a citizenship question specifically around citizenship was discussed on the census was in 1950. And I pulled up the old question here. And I know it's tough to see from far away, but I pulled up the old question that was originally on the census in 1950. And I see here that the question that is being proposed for 2020 is quite materially different. So it is not a reinstatement. It is not to placing again or a restoration of the original question. It is a materially different question. Now, the U.S. Census Act of 1974 requires that if the Secretary finds such a change necessary, they must send a report to Congress on the proposed change, when the question is proposed, not when it is decided upon. Was that legally required report to Congress submitted to us?
I can't respond to your question about the two documents you held up unless you show them to me. I don't have them in front
I did not ask a question about the documents. I asked if the report that is required of you was submitted to Congress.
We filed the required report on March 31st, 2017. We filed another required report on March 31st, 2018.
One last thing. So what we don't have is the required report to Congress. And while there's all of this debate about whether a citizenship question should be included or not included, the question I have is why are we violating the law to include any question whatsoever in the 2020 census?
I believe she's out of time, Chairman.
But you, please do answer the question.
I don't have any need to respond, sir.
You don't have a need to respond?
I have no need to respond.
Okay, well, I'm asking. Could you answer that question, please?
Would you repeat the question, please?
We are now in violation of the U.S. Census Act of 1974, which requires you to submit a specific report to Congress ahead of any changes that you find necessary. This question is not a reinstatement of the 1950 question. It's a change, which means that change requires you to send a report to us while the question is proposed, not before it is decided or settled. So my question is, why are we violating the law to include this question in the 2020
Point of order. We need to, at this particular point, the gentlewoman is talking about a statute that's been violated. There's been no enunciation of what that statute is. I don't even know what she's talking about.
I'd be happy to provide it.
I think she laid it out pretty nicely. She said it twice. I'm serious. Give him.
But in previous testimony, Mr. Chairman, he said that they've submitted reports and
there are 3 reports required. They submitted the first one and the second one, but not the third one that is required to Congress. And this is here in U.S. Code, 13 U.S. Code section 141, Population and Other Census Information, subsection F3. And I'd be happy to provide that to you.
Now, I noticed that all your I guess those are attorneys back there squirming around telling you stuff. Can you tell, maybe they can help us with this answer. Did they tell you what the answer is to that? Got a lot of people back there.
I've been told by counsel that we have complied with all the regulations. I will take up with counsel the suggestions that have been made by the congressperson, and we will get back in due course on the record.
As a follow-up on that question, can you give me that in writing, the fact that you complied with the law?
And, Mr. Chair, I'd also like to note that according to our committee staff, there is not compliance with F3.
Well, he's going to give me, he said he did, so he's going to give me a statement. He's still sworn. He's going to give me a statement saying he did. So I'm looking forward to that statement.
Thank you.
Counsel. All right? All right?